Hi, I'm Emma. The text she found at 3:17 a.m., was she wrong? Let's get into it. The text message appeared on my screen at 3:17 a.m., right after I had just drifted off to sleep. It wasn't a notification from a news app or a forgotten email. It was a screenshot of a banking transaction that made my heart stop in my throat, followed by a photo of a receipt from a boutique in Paris that I knew, with absolute certainty, we had never visited. The receipt showed a purchase of €3,000. The accompanying message from my husband, Marcus, read, "I know this looks bad, but you have to trust me, it's for the surprise you wanted." I sat up in the dark, the blue light of my phone burning into my retinas, staring at the date. It was dated 6 months ago. 6 months. While I was budgeting for our daughter's college fund, while I was working double shifts at the hospital to pay off our mortgage, while I was crying in the shower because I thought we were struggling financially, Marcus had been living a secret life across the ocean. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had been living a completely separate existence for half a year, draining our joint savings to fund a lifestyle I didn't know existed, while telling me every single day that he was worried about money. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. I just felt the floor drop out from under me, a silence so loud it drowned out the hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic outside. My breath hitched, a ragged, broken sound that echoed in the bedroom where we had slept for 12 years. That was the moment. The moment the man I thought I loved vanished, replaced by a stranger wearing his face. But this relationship didn't end in a single moment. It ended slowly, over time, like a house slowly sinking into the ground until a single gust of wind brings the roof down. And to understand how we got here, you need to know how it began, because what makes the betrayal hurt so much is that for so long, it felt like the best part of my life. Marcus and I met at a community garden in the city center, a place we both volunteered at every Saturday morning. It was a quirky, low-key start, nothing like the dramatic meet-cuties in the movies. I was tending to some heirloom tomatoes, and he was trying to figure out how to fix a broken trellis. We spent 3 hours fixing the trellis and then another 3 hours sitting on a bench sharing a bagel, talking about our fears of adulthood and our dreams of writing books we'd never actually write. There was a magnetic quality to him, a quiet confidence that made the world feel manageable. He was an architect, a man who saw beauty in structure and logic, and he treated my chaotic, emotional mind with a patience that felt like a gift. The early days of our relationship were a golden haze. We were inseparable. We had a language of our own, filled with inside jokes about the garden and the way he would tap his foot when he was thinking. He was the one who held my hand when my grandmother passed away, the one who made me laugh when I was at my lowest point in my nursing career. He was my rock. I fell in love with the way he looked at the world, and I thought I could show him a better way to feel. We bought a house together 2 years after we started dating, a small, fixer-upper place that we poured our blood and sweat into. We painted the walls, we fought over tile colors, and we celebrated every small victory. It felt like we were building a fortress against the world. But looking back now, in the cold light of that 3:17 a.m., there were moments then that I wish I had paid attention to. There were nights he came home later than usual, saying he was working late on a project, but when he kissed me, he smelled faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine. I thought it was a colleague, or maybe a client, or perhaps he was just visiting a friend. I told myself he was being generous, that he was a social person who needed to maintain connections. I saw him checking his phone more often, his face lighting up with a smile when he saw a notification, a smile he rarely gave me anymore. I noticed that he stopped asking about my day as much, that the questions became more routine, less curious. I told myself he was stressed with his new promotion, that he was just tired. I told myself that I was being paranoid, that I was overthinking because I felt insecure about my own career. I dismissed the red flags as the natural fading of the honeymoon phase, convincing myself that real love is about sticking it out through the boredom, that the passion would return if we just kept working at it. But the truth is, the foundation was already cracking, and I was just too in love with the idea of us to see the fracture lines. The deterioration wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a slow erosion, a series of small chisels striking away at the bedrock of our marriage. It started with the silence. He stopped coming to bed at the same time as me. When he did, he would roll over, facing the wall, and I would lie there wondering if he was sleeping or just waiting for the morning. The arguments began to feel less like resolutions and more like skirmishes. We fought about the money, which felt like a lie in hindsight, because he was the one who insisted we cut back on everything. He would say, "We can't afford a vacation this year," or, "We need to be careful with the utilities." I was the one canceling plans, the one making do, the one feeling the pinch of financial anxiety every day. I remember one specific night, 6 months before the discovery, when I found him staring at a laptop in the living room at midnight. I asked what he was doing, and he jumped, slamming the laptop shut. "Nothing," he said, his voice tight. "Just work." But he wouldn't look at me. I asked if everything was okay, and he snapped, "Why does everything have to be an interrogation? I'm just tired." That was the first time he raised his voice at me in a year. It felt like a warning, a boundary being drawn, but I rationalized it as stress. We had a big fight about his mother the next week. She had called me, upset because Marcus hadn't visited her in months, and I was the one who had to mediate the fallout. I felt like the middleman in a war I didn't understand. During the fight, he said something that haunted me, "You don't understand my life anymore." He made me feel like I was a stranger in my own home. I cried for 3 days straight. I packed a bag. I told him I was going to my sister's. He looked at me, and for a second, I thought he was going to beg, to tell me what was wrong, to fix it. Instead, he just said, "Okay, go." He didn't stop me. He just watched me leave, and that lack of urgency terrified me. I stayed at my sister's for 2 days, and on the third day, he called, his voice soft, apologetic, promising to change. He told me he was confused, that he was struggling with the pressure of his career and he felt lost. He promised to be more open, to make us a priority. And I believed him. I always believed him. I told myself that he was going through a phase, that every marriage hits a wall, and that we were just hitting ours. I rationalized his distance as him needing space to figure himself out. I ignored the fact that he had stopped making eye contact, the fact that he was constantly on his phone, the fact that he was lying about his schedule. I held on to the hope that the man I fell in love with was still in there somewhere, buried under the stress and the confusion. I told myself that if we just communicated better, if we just tried harder, we could get back to where we were. I ignored the gut feeling that screamed at me that something was fundamentally broken, because admitting that would mean admitting that I had wasted 12 years of my life on a lie. I chose hope over my intuition, and that choice cost me everything. The betrayal itself was not a singular event but a web of lies that had been woven over 6 months. It wasn't just an affair, though there was that. It was a complete fabrication of a second life. Marcus had been seeing a woman named Elena, a former classmate from architecture school who had moved to Paris. They had reconnected online, and it had escalated quickly. But the affair was the easy part. The real betrayal was the financial deception. Marcus had opened a hidden bank account, using his personal savings and slowly siphoning funds from our joint account under the guise of investment opportunities. He had told me that the money was for a new house renovation project, a dream we had talked about for years. He showed me fake contracts, fake invoices, and fake receipts. He made me believe we were on the verge of a financial windfall. In reality, the money was going to fund his trips to Paris to be with Elena, to buy her gifts, to pay for their hotel stays and dinners, and to fund a lifestyle he was living while I was scraping by. He had booked a flight to Paris 6 months ago, claiming he was attending a conference, and he had taken the money to pay for a luxury apartment for the week. He had done this 5 times. Each time, he would come home with a story about a crisis at work, a client emergency, a broken pipe. Each time, I would worry, I would cry, I would try to fix the problem. He had even set up a fake email address for the contractor, on the renovation project, and he would forward me emails to prove he was busy. The lie was so elaborate, so meticulously constructed, that I had never questioned it. I knew the exact moment it unraveled. I was going through his old phone, which he had left charging on the nightstand, trying to find a password for a bill. He had forgotten to log out of his email client. I saw the inbox, and I saw the folder labeled Paris. I opened it, and there they were, the emails, the bookings, the receipts, the photos of the two of them in Paris, smiling, looking happier than they had ever been in front of me. I saw the transfer confirmations to the hidden account, the dates, the amounts. I saw the message from him to Elena, "I love you." I wish I could tell her the truth, but she's too trusting. That was the sentence that broke me. Not the money, not the trip, but the realization that he saw me as too trusting, a label he used as an excuse to exploit my love. I confronted him the next morning. I sat him down at the kitchen table, the photos and the printouts spread out in front of him. I didn't scream. I just put them down and waited. He looked at them, then at me, and for the first time, I saw the mask slip completely. His face went pale, his hands trembled. He tried to say it was a misunderstanding, that he was confused, that he didn't know how to tell me. He begged for forgiveness, promising to pay it back, promising to cut contact with Elena. But the damage was done. The trust was gone. The man I loved was a stranger who had been lying to my face for half a year, building a life of deception on the ruins of our marriage. The aftermath was a spiral of emotions that felt like a physical illness. The first week was pure denial. I refused to believe it was real. I thought I had found a glitch in the system, a misunderstanding that could be fixed with a little logic and a lot of reassurance. I told myself it was just a fling, a moment of weakness that he would regret. I wanted to believe that he was still my husband, that we could fix this. But the reality of his behavior was undeniable. He was distant, evasive, and defensive. When I tried to talk to him, he would shut down, or he would turn the conversation around to how hurt he was that I had invaded his privacy, even though I had found the evidence of his deception. I told my best friend, Sarah, who reacted with a mixture of shock and anger. She told me to leave, to file for divorce immediately. But my family, my parents, they took a different side. My mother, who had seen how hard I worked to keep the marriage together, told me that Marcus was just going through a phase, and that I was being too harsh. She said I was making a mountain out of a molehill, that I should give him another chance, that 12 years of history meant something. My father, too, was supportive of Marcus, saying that men make mistakes, but they don't always know how to fix them. I felt incredibly alone. The people I trusted the most were telling me that I was the problem, that I was overreacting. The loneliest moment was when I sat in the car, after a visit from my parents, realizing that I had no one on my side. I was the one with the evidence, the one with the pain, the one who had been lied to, and yet, I was the one being gaslit into thinking I was the crazy one. I considered leaving that night. I packed a bag again, but this time, I didn't go to my sister's. I stayed in the car, sitting in the driveway, staring at the house. I realized that if I left, I would be walking away from everything I had built, from the house, from the memories, from the promise of a future that was now a lie. I went back inside, and I made a decision. I decided to try again. I told Marcus that I would give him one more chance, but that if he lied to me again, if he even looked at that woman, I would be gone for good. I told him I needed to see him change, I needed to see him put in the effort. He promised he would. He cried, he hugged me, he kissed me. And I let him believe that I was still on board, that I was still the loving wife who would forgive and forget. But in my heart, I knew the truth. I knew that the marriage was dead. I was just trying to figure out how to bury it without killing me in the process. I was in the spiral of trying to salvage something that was already gone, and every day was a battle between my hope and my reality. To understand the full picture, we have to look at both sides of this tragedy, because the truth is rarely black and white. From my perspective, the betrayal was a violation of the most sacred trust between two people. I was the victim of a calculated deception, a woman who was systematically drained of her savings and her emotional security. I felt used, manipulated, and erased. I had given everything to this marriage, and he had repaid me with a lie that made me question my own sanity. I was angry, devastated, and humiliated. I felt like a fool for not seeing it sooner, for ignoring the signs. I felt like I had lost not just my husband, but my identity as a partner, a decision-maker, and a trustworthy human being. But from Marcus's perspective, the story is different. He told me later, in a moment of clarity after the initial confrontation, that he felt suffocated. He said that the pressure of the marriage, the constant financial stress we were facing, the feeling that he was never doing enough, had driven him away. He didn't just fall in love with Elena, he fell in love with the idea of escape. He told me that he felt like he was losing himself in the marriage, that he was just a provider, a husband, a father, but never really Marcus. He justified his actions by telling himself that he was finding himself, that he was trying to reclaim a part of his identity that he felt had been swallowed by his family obligations. He told me that he didn't want to hurt me, that he was just trying to find a way to feel alive again. He saw my trust as a weakness, not a strength, and he used that trust to fuel his deception. He told me that he didn't think the affair would cause this much pain, that he thought he could keep it separate, that he thought he could have both worlds. It's a human, albeit a terrible, justification. He wasn't a monster, he was a man who was lost, who made a terrible choice to escape his problems rather than face them. He didn't realize that by running away, he was destroying the very thing he claimed to want to save. And I, in turn, have to acknowledge that I ignored the signs. I ignored the distance, the lies, the changes in his behavior. I was so desperate to believe in the story of our love that I refused to see the cracks. I allowed the rationalizations to take over my own instincts. I think we both failed, but in different ways. He failed by choosing deception over communication, by choosing a fantasy over a reality that required work. I failed by ignoring the reality of the situation, by believing the lie because it was more comfortable than the truth. We both played a part in the destruction of our marriage, even if one of us was the architect of the collapse and the other was the one who tried to rebuild it on a foundation of lies. So now, we have to ask the question that drives this entire channel: guilty or not? Is Marcus purely guilty, a villain who betrayed his wife for a fling and financial gain? Or is the situation more complicated than it appears? Was he a man driven to the edge, a person who made a catastrophic error in judgment because he felt lost and unfulfilled? And what about me? Am I entirely blameless, the innocent victim of a cruel deception, or was I complicit in my own downfall by refusing to see the truth? There is a strong argument that Marcus is guilty. He chose to lie, to cheat, to steal from his wife. He violated the core tenets of a marriage, and no amount of stress or confusion justifies that level of betrayal. He is the one who has to live with the consequences of his actions. But there is also an argument that he is a product of his own emotional struggles, a man who made a terrible choice in a moment of weakness, a man who was struggling to cope with the pressures of life. And what about me? Was I to blame for ignoring the signs? For prioritizing the idea of a happy marriage over the reality of a crumbling relationship? Some might say that my willingness to overlook the red flags was a form of complicity, that I enabled his behavior by refusing to confront it. But others would argue that trust is the foundation of a relationship, and that when that trust is violated, the victim is never at fault. The truth lies somewhere in the middle. Marcus is guilty of the betrayal, of the lies, of the theft. He cannot escape that. But the story is more complicated than a simple villain and victim narrative. It's a story of two people who lost their way, who stopped communicating, who stopped seeing each other, and who eventually collided with the consequences of their choices. So, guilty or not? Love, lies, and hard choices. You decide. I want to know what you think. Was Marcus's betrayal a result of his own failings, or was there something deeper that drove him to that point? Do you think I was wrong to try to save the marriage, or was I right to give it one last chance? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your intuition and your love, and how did it turn out? These are the questions that keep us up at night, the questions that define our relationships and our choices. If you've ever been in a similar situation, if you've ever had to face the devastating truth of a betrayal, please share your story in the comments below. Your experiences help us all understand the complexity of love and the pain of loss. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Guilty or Not, Relationships. We have so many more stories to tell, stories of love, loss, and the hard choices we make every day. Next week, we'll be diving into a story about a long-distance relationship that turned into a nightmare, where the betrayal wasn't physical, but emotional, and the lies were even more damaging. Make sure you're here for that one. Thank you for listening, for sharing your time, and for being part of this community where we can talk about the hard things. Until next time, remember to trust your gut, and to love with your eyes wide open.